How you doing, folks? This is Rex from the Buckeyenest, and we're going to build up another super duper computer here. My client, pretty neat guy, called me up and said, come on out, let's talk about a new machine. And with him being a retired Air Force guy, he said to me, Rex, I want Air Force One, buddy. I don't want to have to buy another computer for the rest of my life. Well, we put together some thought process and some money ideas, and this is what we come up with. So what I'm going to talk to you about now is the tower preparation for the setup of a new computer. That of course is sometimes referred to as a chassis or a case, and this particular one here is made by a company called Ultra, and this is their Rogue model. Now I've got it stripped down and opened up at this point because I'm going to start adding hardware to it here, but give you an idea, it looks pretty cool. This is the front of it that goes right here on the front, and then this is the actual cover that goes on there, and you'll see that on there when the build's done. And Ultra does a pretty good job. Ultra does a pretty good job setting this case up. Because what I was impressed with, which makes my job easier, if you see these little gold screw holes knobs here, they already put those in. And the reason they did that is if you don't have that special tool to put them in, it's too easy to strip that aluminum, and then you end up stripping it, and then you can't tighten down your motherboard. Now your next piece of hardware you're going to get is a motherboard. Now the reason I'm telling you about that now is over here, if you see this over here, this is called an I/O panel, input-output panel. And this is your motherboard that we're going to put in there. And you can see all the different connectors here. USB ports, Cat5 connection for your internet, audio, more USB ports. This is USB 3, and then they got PS2 connectors on there, which is pretty neat. I don't know why they would do that nowadays, because mostly people are using USB connections now for hooking up their keyboards and mouses and monitors and all kinds of other things. But that I/O panel, that input-output panel there, which stands for I/O, just fits in there. You just push it in there. Sometimes it's a little tough to make it snap in, but it will snap in. And that's one of the things you do to prep your case, so you can start building. The other thing that you used to have to do is, as I said, mount these screws here, these receptacles for your motherboard screws, but I'm noticing now that in new builds, a lot of companies are actually putting those in there for you to keep you from stripping those holes. Now, something else they're doing pretty neat too, which is they're selling these cases with fans. You see this fan right here, that's already pre-installed. There's two more here in the front. I'm going to turn this here to the side so you can see. But what's neat about this particular case is you can pull this cover off, and there's a filter you can put back here if you wish, and there's the fans. Now they put the fans in there to create airflow through the system so it keeps it cooler. So then you put these panel covers back on there, and they just slide over and lock back in place, which is something new that this particular company does with their custom computer builds and their cases. Down here in the bottom of the case, there's setup receptacles for adding fans there if you wish, and up here in the top, you can see them right there. There's also an area there to add two 120 millimeter fans. So we could actually add 1, 2, 3, 4 more fans to this system if we wanted to create the cooling But the reason we're not is this, the Air Force One build here that we're talking about, we're going to put liquid cooling in this computer. Now this is pretty awesome, because what this does is this is called the radiator, and it mounts on the inside of the wall here on the back. This is where the power supply goes, and then the radiator can go here, or the radiator can go down here on the bottom, but it mounts there. It's a sealed system. You can see the lines running off of it here, and this piece here mounts on top of your CPU on the motherboard, which is this area right here on the motherboard. That's where the CPU goes, and that goes on top of it there. And then of course you plug it all up, and there's a sealed, this is a sealed system, so there's cooling in there, something similar to antifreeze or whatever you might want to call it. This is made by Corsair, and then that runs through your system, your computer, and these fans that they sent with it, you mount them, and it cools the liquid and ships it, and then it goes back and around through the processor, over top the processor, and draws the heat off of it. So that's one of the latest and greatest. Of course, if you wanted to do the ultimate cooling, they've actually, believe it or not, built little air conditioning units that you can put in your computer, in your case, to keep it all nice and cool. Because the cooler a computer is, the better it will perform. That's why you've always heard people say you need to put your computers in air-conditioned rooms or offices or things of that nature, and that is true. So the less heat you have building up inside the case, the better it's going to run. If it starts getting really, really hot, then it's going to take away life expectancy on the hardware itself. So that could be a big problem. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to the next step, and that's I'm going to mount that motherboard in there, tighten up all the screws on that, mount that liquid cooling system on there, and set up all that, and add these two fans. Then I'll turn the camera back on and let you show where we're at, let you see where we're at so far. So I'll be back in a few minutes. How you doing, folks? This is Rex at the Buckeyenest, and I almost forgot to mention something here to you, so I'm going to tell you this. If you ever hear me pop back in and make the comment "note to self," and that's what I'm doing right now, note to self, that means I almost forgot to tell you something, so I'm telling you now. So we were talking a minute ago about preparing your case here to start adding in your hardware, and I mentioned this is the input-output faceplate that comes with your motherboard, and you put that in the case there, and then you mount the screws here so you can mount the motherboard in properly. But something else you want to do too, before you do any of that other stuff, is if you have external fans. I already pointed out we can put fans down here in the bottom, right? Remember that? Down here there's 2 spots, and up here in the top there's 2 spots. So if you have any other external fans you want to mount, you need to do that before you start putting in the motherboard, unless you're 100% sure that those fans are going to block you being able to seat that motherboard properly and tighten it down. And in this case, I've got some extra fans that I need to mount, along with the liquid cool system that I bought for this, and I showed that to you earlier, but I'm going to show it to you again. And this is the liquid cool that I bought, and a fan goes here, and then this is going to mount up here in the top. So I want to put this in after I put in the motherboard. You see what I'm talking about? Because this may block, or I may end up having to mount it in the bottom of the case, which means it's going to have to go in here like this, because the power supply goes in this spot right here. But in any case, you don't want to add any of these peripherals into your case, like your liquid cooling system or any other fans or anything like that, until you've got your motherboard completely set up and you're ready to put that in the case. You put that in the case and you've already got your RAM installed. This is the socket where the processor goes. You've already got your processor installed and you're ready to set this, you put this into the cooling fan on top of your processor right here, and you bolt all that down and everything, so when you get ready to do it, all you need to do is just mount the radiator in wherever you decide to mount it, and this all goes in the case and the motherboard gets bolted down tight and everything. Then you start adding in hard drives and DVD burners. In this case we bought a Blu-ray burner for this, and you start mounting radiators for liquid cooling systems, and you add in all your other peripherals that go in these different slots in this case here. And you line up, you set up your fan controller to control these fans in the front and that one in the back, and your fans up on the top or the bottom, wherever you happen to mount them, to augment this cooling system here. So the point I'm trying to make, without stuttering here too much on you, is you're going to prep your case. You're going to take a good hard look at all the hardware you're going to add to the case. You're going to determine if the hardware is going to block the actual mounting of the motherboard, the actual mounting of the cooling system, being able to add the RAM in, or block any ports or connectors on the motherboard itself. So you may have to install, for example, the RAM on this board goes in this slot right here. Well, we may have to install that RAM before we put the motherboard in, because it may be blocked by the processor's cooler, liquid cooler there. So have to evaluate all that. This particular motherboard holds 2 video cards. This is called Crossfire. These 2 slots here, you can add 2 video cards of the same type, put what's called a bridge on them, and then you'll have 2 video cards running. These are standard PCI slots. These are PCI 16 slots that hold special types of boards. And then over here, as I said, your RAM goes in here. This is your power source. These are SATA connectors for hard drives and Blu-ray players and DVD burners and things of that nature. This is what we called way back in the day a math coprocessor underneath of that cooler right there. So in the back here, since I'm already into it, this is your audio connections. This is your Cat5 connection for your home network. These are USB ports, 2.0 USB ports, the black ones. This motherboard has USB 3.0 on it. That's these blue ones. And these are what's called PS2 connectors for our keyboard and the mouse. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't know why they put those PS2 connectors on there, because frankly I don't even think they're selling PS2 keyboards and mouses anywhere unless you find them in a small mom and pop shop. You might be able to buy them online through an internet resource, but I don't think any of your big retail stores are selling PS2 mouses and keyboards anymore. So given all that, I'm now going to shut this back down, and I'm going to go ahead and do my system evaluation like I just told you. I'm going to check my motherboard to make sure I'm not going to run into any foul ups there when I get ready to install it in this area here. And then I'm going to add the RAM to it and mount that one end of the cooler to it. And then I'll put that inside the case and tighten it all up. And then I'll come back and show you where we're at with that here in just a few minutes. So I'll be back. Okay, note to self. I almost forgot to tell you the most important piece on the motherboard is the socket for the processor. This is the processor here. And this is probably the easiest piece you're going to ever have to put into a computer, because it's all put into what's called a ZIF socket. This is a ZIF socket, and ZIF stands for Zero Insertion Force. And what you do is, you see this bar right here, I got my finger on, you pull that out a little bit and you lift it up. And this socket right here all shifts. Now down here on where you insert this, you'll see these little points here and these little shavings on there. So you look on this processor, you turn it over, and you look down here, and you'll see that these are the two closest, and these are the two farthest apart. These are the two closest, and these are the two farthest apart. Now what you don't want to do is you don't want to handle this chip, so you bend these little pins on the back here. If you bend up those pins on the back, let me see if I can give you a better picture of it, you're going to have some problems. And if you bend them over, you'll probably break them off, and then you just blew your processor. This processor here is a 4.0 gigahertz 8-core processor is what I'm getting ready to insert in this machine. So now, once again, I'm going to look down here on the motherboard. This is my ZIF socket. I see these 2 points here. You see these here. So that tells me these have to line up here. So I'm going to turn this like this. And then I'm going to look up here. And if everything's all hunky-dory, I should be able to just set that processor down there and it'll drop right in those holes. And it did. So now I'm happy camper. I'm going to pull this rod down and I'm going to slip it underneath that little catch there. That socket all shifted and locked all those little pins into place. Now, something else you don't want to do is start handling the top of this processor with your fingers. The oil on your fingers could cause damage to it when it heats up. So if you've had to touch it in any way, shape, or form, you want to take just a cloth like this and you want to rub the fingerprints off the top of that processor. So you've removed all that oily residue. And then that liquid cooler I showed you earlier is going to mount on top of this through these sockets, but I have to stop and read the instructions on it and make sure if these mounting brackets are going to fit it, or if I'm going to have to take those mounting brackets off and replace it with the ones that came with it, because if you see this plate underneath it here, this plate's all going to come loose, and I'm going to mount that cooler after I put some thermal paste on this to that processor, and then I'm going to mount the motherboard into the case. So I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, note to self, folks, I'm back. In the previous session I told you about how to prep your case, and I told you I was going to set up the motherboard with the cooling system on it so we could get that installed properly. So here's your update. You'll notice I still have the main cover missing and the side covers and stuff, because my goal was to get this thing right here attached to this so it could cool that processor, and then get the motherboard, which is this piece here, okay, mounted inside the case. Got all that done. A little difficult, I mean, for me, because I'm an old fart with bad eyes. So I had to get the spotlights out here, as you can see, and turn on get the magnetic tool screw recovery stuff, because we tend to drop screws on the floor at least a dozen times while we're trying to get all these little tiny minute things to line up right, which was part of the bear with this process, because these cables are allow liquid to flow through them, and you have to be very careful when you're installing the system that you don't break them or scratch them or cause a problem. And then this thing here is the radiator, and I had to install these two fans. So what happens is while I was doing that, I had to set up this fan first, which is mounted to the case. Then I had to mount the liquid cooling radiator to that fan. Then I had to mount another fan behind the liquid cool. So what is happening is when this system is running, and I plugged it all in, but when it's running, it's drawing liquid through and spitting it out the other cable. It's going through this radiator, and these two fans are cooling that liquid and taking it back in on top of that processor, which is keeping this thing running at a nice cool temperature. And if you recall, I told you earlier, the cooler the temperature your computer runs at, the better it's going to run. Then it came with these connectors here, and one of them I connected to the main spot on the motherboard. That's it right there. Can you see that? It might be a little dark in there, but it's a 3-prong connector, and I plugged that in. That supplies power to the whole cooling unit. And then when I added these fans, they were nice enough to allow the fans to be connected to another cable to the processor cooling part here, and the power for the whole cooling system comes from this point right here on the motherboard. So that's pretty neat. Then they were really nice enough to supply us with wire ties. You see that thing right there? That's a wire tie. Now what am I going to do with that? Well, it's pretty simple. It doesn't do any good to go through all this work setting up this motherboard and adding all this cooling system if you don't create an airflow space. So that's what I'm doing. If you see here, I'm gathering up all that loose wire. I'm putting it up in a nice little bundle. I'm taking this wire tie. I use zip ties, electrical zip ties, but since they provided these and they're black, which gives you an aesthetics appearance too inside the case, so I just tie all those up, and it's kind of hard to see, but you can see here how I got all those wires tied up down there with that wire tie, and it creates a better flow, especially for these fans here in the front, because I had to remove the one case fan that came with it, this one here, and I'm going to reinstall that someplace around here, maybe in the top or down here in the bottom. And I'm still waiting on my AeroCool fan controller to show up today. Hopefully that'll show up today. UPS will bring that. So, all right, so to recap what we've done so far, we prepped the case, we installed the input-output panel. I told you about that a couple of times. That's where, when I put this motherboard in there, you can see how all the connectors lined up perfectly with that panel here. Okay, let me turn a little more here. There you go. And these are the PS2 connectors it was talking about. These are your 3.0 USB connectors. These are your 2.0. Here's your Cat 45 cable for your home network, and here's a couple of USB standard 2.0 connectors, and this is all your audio plug-in here. So that's all set up there, and that motherboard you can see backed right up to it, and then I put screws in the motherboard and tightened it down, so it's all going to remain in one place. And just so you know, I didn't have any leftover screws. I used every one of them. That's something I do at the Buckeyenest. I make sure I get every screw in there and get everything tightened down just like it's supposed to be at the proper pressure and things of that nature. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through here and I'm going to add the RAM. That's what goes in these slots here. We bought 16 gigabytes of RAM, which will make this computer scream right along with that 4.0 gigahertz processor. Then I'm going to add the video cards, and they'll go in here. We have a Crossfire set up for the video cards, so when I come back, you'll be able to see me. Then I'm going to put in the power source, which goes down here, and I'm going to plug up all the basic stuff: the RAM, the motherboard, the cooler, and I'm going to boot this bad boy up. And if everything is okay, no water will come, or no liquid will come squirting out of here, and the thing won't catch fire and blow up on us. And at that point, I'll be a happy camper. And then I'll continue on with installing the different hard drives and the Blu-ray burner and getting all that set up. And then we'll set up the operating system, and which is Windows 7 Home Premium. I got him a version that gives him a free upgrade to Windows 10 when it comes out. So we'll set all that up and do some little peeking and tweaking and install this other fan again, and I'll be back with you in a few minutes. I'm starting to ramble, so I don't want to bore you. So I'll be back in a few minutes, folks, with another note to selfie. Oh, that's right. I was going to quit giving notes to Selfie.